September 14th, 2021 meeting of the Community Advisory Board Review Committee, the Cabrc. And we're here now live at City Council chambers. We are joined by Acting Chief Chris Witzenberg and by Katie Becker, the Personnel Director, and we have Council Member John Rafter here with us as well. I want to quickly just reiterate, because again, what we've done is we've archived now the process over the course of the entirety of our CAB meetings, which I think is extremely valuable. And for the purposes of folks that are watching, because we're live streaming, and people who will look at the archive version of this on YouTube, I think it's important that we do the same as we have done throughout this process, which is to identify not only for ourselves what we're talking about, but also for the public. Also, what our strategies and expectations are for this to be an effective, efficient meeting that produces the results that we want. So to reiterate for everyone here and anyone who might be watching this, our charge was to take the CAB, the Community Advisory Board's recommendations, and consider each of them uniquely and not render any judgment of the CAB's rationale for making the recommendations, but to the best of our ability to adhere to the spirit of the recommendations while making sure that they were legal and passed contractual muster. That all sounds right to everybody? Yes. Okay, so that was the process. That still is the process. And what I'd like to do in this meeting to push this along, what we want to do is provide, as we had said at council, and correct me, you would know better than anybody, Carrie, if I'm wrong here, but our intention is to provide, by going through the questions that were submitted to us, a unified, essentially, response to council around each one of the concerns that they have, so that they have actionable items at council to vote yay or nay on. That sounds correct to you as well, Kate? Carrie? So that said, what I'd like to do is read for each of these questions that were posed to us by 3 council members. And thank you for that. John is the only one here, but thank you for that, John. The questions that were posed by council members, I'll read the original CAB recommendation. I'll read what we wrote after much consideration. And I'm going to ask Luke, Dave, or Len at the juncture of my finishing that version of the recommendation, ours, that you explain why we made the decision we did relative to the original content. All right. And then we'll look at the questions that were posed. We should be able, with that background, to be able to address in a way that we can bring back to council. And it may be that we require additional discussion around things. Does that make sense to all when you look?
Yeah, you're going to read the original CAB.
Just the question. And then our recommendation that we pulled from that question after discussion, we'll need to take a minute or two to explain to anyone who might be watching in the community why we made that adjustment. And I think we can do that pretty quickly because we know why we got to these various places. And then we look at the questions that were posed, and hopefully that background on each of these questions will be enough for us to be able to answer the questions that were posed. Does that make sense to all? And does it sound like a plan? Dave, Luke, Len? Dave says yes. Luke? Yes. Yes. Len?
Give it a shot.
Let's give it a shot. It's all about getting through it, right? So with that, the first section, and it's marked as 1, but I believe that is A, what was written in the CAB was, and this is under transparency and reporting and gathering of information. While this board is not aware of any data that OPD gathers from third parties, Amazon Ring cameras, etc., in the interest of transparency, we recommend the Common Council advise OPD to develop a procedure to assure the public that information gathered was not through third parties. What we wrote While this board is not aware of any data that OPD gathers from corporate and third parties, in the interest of transparency, we acknowledge that OPD cannot enter into any corporate third-party agreement without common council approval. This ensures that only on a citizen's Fourth Amendment right to privacy is respected. If OPD deems this information to be necessary but is denied access, they are able to apply for a warrant to obtain this information. Who can make the leap from what was written to what we wrote
What was written in,
by the CAB versus what we provided as our recommendation?
In that particular scenario,
Yes.
we were concerned about cameras on people's homes, if I
Right.
remember correctly. And that led us through the conversation, which led us to the finality of what A says. Chief Witzenberg gave us quite a bit of insight, and I believe City Attorney Merzig also gave us insight on the third party. But after, are we jumping to what was suggested by a council member? They're absolutely right. The finance committee would be the first step in reviewing any contracts. Then it goes to the common council for final approval, which we're authorizing the mayor, which I believe is the only individual allowed to sign contracts representing the city because of our city charter. And that would be the process going through this.
And in our conversation, just to land back on that piece, we actually talked about the fact that there is no contract that will go to we cannot sign a contract that council hasn't approved ultimately.
Correct.
And
Any
that was
department
important.
supervisor cannot sign a contract.
Right. So now, anything that we want to add to that in terms of the thinking on it? So go ahead.
no, I don't think so. I think Len, you did a good job. This was part of a back when we were in the process of doing the CAB. So this was back in the winter. Concerns over larger national trends where we're seeing Amazon reach out to municipalities, and there was discomfort among many folks, myself included, about that going on without going through the proper chain.
Sure. So what the council member provided us in terms of their comments here, those comments are addressed by what you just said, Len, and by the verbiage that we provided, which is basically, yes, that's right. Nothing will run through any third-party contract, will not happen unless the council's approved it. And that is what it says here. So moving on, everybody's satisfied that we know what we're saying as the question is discussed. Council, moving on to the second issue, still in section 1, and it's marked here as 2, but it's B. And what the CAB wrote was, this board recommends the Common Council formally enshrine positive policies such as Chief Benner's laudable policy against creating any form of quota system and any future use of OPD, any future of using OPD as a mechanism for revenue generation. What we wrote was city government shall not use, only on the police department, OPD for revenue generation via a quota system or any other mechanism. And I can address this. This is essentially a cleanup of the language and a reduction of the verbiage, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree, Len?
Is it that they want changed?
It's a comment more, I think. And so I'll read the comment, and that is, mention of the Fourth Amendment violations need clarification, probably from the city attorney. The issue here seems to be quotas or financial goals to drive income for the city. In fact, financial fees and fees are part of the city enforcement of legitimate codes and regulations. And budget considerations, fees or other can be estimated as a forecast impacting city revenue. I agree that setting a quota for tickets or snow shoveling fees that motivate enforcement is wrong. However, both code and law enforcement officers can be expected to ticket violators of legitimate ordinance and laws. Question, is there any evidence that employees are expected to meet quotas for revenue? Again, what we said was OPD will not use, the government will not use OPD for revenue generation via a quota system. So Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just for everyone involved, the behind this, not that there's any evidence of OPD doing this or codes doing this, but it's good to have it in writing, just so we have it in writing. In the past, in other municipalities, there have been political pressures on different agencies to either ramp up or ramp down collection of tickets.
Mhm.
And again, there's no evidence that's happened in Oneonta, but we may as well cover our bases, make sure that we're ensuring that the policy is in place and not wait for it to happen.
Well, I want to point out, there's also, I don't disagree with you. There's a difference between ramping up or ramping down the collection of tickets and actually setting a monthly quota. I think we'll all agree, we probably all heard in our time of rumors wherever we've lived that there's always a quota on tickets. And I don't know of any proof of that actually being in existence. But it's that thought that's out there that drove the recommendation from the board to us. So I think it's good that we put it in writing that we are not going to use OPD to issue tickets for a quota system or anything.
Our recommendation is short, explicit, to the point. And yes, it's also redundant because we aren't doing that, but it basically it memorializes it.
Right.
Len?
I had nothing to add.
The term quota seems to go to an upper level. However, there are jobs, for example, we have a parking enforcement officer. If over the course of a month, that parking enforcement officer issued no tickets, there would be a bottom line to that. There's a performance that would have to do with expectations that could be, any supervisor could use it. You're a salesperson, you're supposed to make sales. You've made no sales in a year. Perhaps there's a reason for that. It could be our products are no good, or our parking meters were off. But the ideal is we won't be acting as if we're an Arkansas town near an interstate. It's going to be going out and ripping people off for tickets. And I think, but think about, the downside of that, saying you can't expect me, it's a reasonable question. What am I supposed to, when will I be doing a good enough job? And when will I be doing a terrific job? Either as a code enforcement officer, police officer, or as a parking.
So appreciate that, John. So getting back to committee, what we're looking at is this verbiage that we provided defensible. Is this what we want to provide to council? Everybody agrees that it is?
I think so. Yep.
All in favor? Aye.
Mark, may I make a quick comment?
Certainly.
A lot of these, and we've talked about this in committee at length. A lot of these recommendations may seem redundant. One of the things we've come across is there's a lot of things that are done at City Hall, are done at OPD that the public might not be aware of. So in stating these requirements, even if some of them are already going on and they seem redundant, it's for purposes of transparency to ensure that we've done our best to address the concern from the CAB.
Thank you, Dave.
Just a point of clarification, I don't believe we need to re-vote on any
Yeah,
of these.
I realized it as I
Kind of
was saying
change.
it. Right. Yes.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Yeah, we'd be here forever with motions and votes. But yes, we are in agreement as a committee that this is something we can continue to bring forward for council review and vote. And then, go ahead.
I just wanted to point to John, if you are the author of this question of number 2, is that we did talk extensively with the police chief, and he gave us a background of the culture of the department through his 25 years, that there's never been a culture that they needed to go out and meet quotas. And so based on that, even in Luke's perspective, he felt from a street level that there was no quota system that was out there. And so we felt as a committee that this was the cleanest language that we could get it down to address that issue.
I understand. It's just by using this, it evokes the possibility that you're correcting something that never existed. And I don't think that that's a service, because if people unknowing that suggested that this was necessary, and it's amplified by the council that quotas, oh, no more quotas. without any remark that there's no evidence that we've ever used this kind of a system. We will not unjustly, or whatever it might mean by quota.
So are you suggesting that
I'm
we
thinking-
we as a committee that are addressing this document, that it's the quota part is what you're having an issue with, it, since there was never a quota system in place, that we should have some kind of verbiage that identifies that? Is that what your hangup is?
My hangup?
I don't know how else, how,
Sounds like a neurotic problem on my part, which is probably true. But it's just that when you raise something,
sure,
it evokes, first of all, in a public document perhaps, that there's been something going on.
right.
And if there's been nothing going on, that there's a mistake or just a wad of wet paper thrown against the wall and it sticks. That's the danger of the wording.
And that could very much be in the mind of the beholder, in the eye of the beholder scenario. I think if we're comfortable moving forward with the language of number 1B, then we should move on to number 1C, which is the CAB's paragraph recommendation is the board recommends that the Common Council instruct OPD develop Know Your Rights resources portal that is easily accessed by visitors, linked from the OPD website. And what we provided was the OPD will develop a Know Your Rights resources portal that is linked to the OPD website and is easily accessed by visitors. Basically, just a cleanup of language. And what we have in terms of comments, we've just got the one on this particular subsection. This is the first recommendation for information and guidance posted on the website. Is also found or implied in EFG I in section 2, A, B, and F. Also advise use of the website to achieve the recommendation goals. I suggest that these can be considered in relation to a redesign of the city website and of consideration of how such documents can be useful to the public. Of course, the current website has a link to documents, and the information recommended to be web accessible could be placed there. So I think we could all probably agree that that's a very good recommendation. Not necessarily something that gets added to our document, but something that should be taken into consideration as the website is being developed. Would you say? Would all agree? Good. I don't believe that there's any reason to modify language, and I think we can probably move on to the last, which then actually this one has several council members inputting to. So the language of the CAB is the board recommends that the Common Council instruct OPD to remove threatening language around false reporting from their online complaint form. And what we wrote was Common Council instructs OPD to continue its policy of removing threatening language around false crime reporting from their online complaint form. And we have a few comments. I'm going to read each that's applicable. One, it's okay to remove threatening language from form. This is not a form to allege a crime. Quick follow-up by police or city administrators should be the first step to clarify the nature of the complaint. Another addressing the same topic is still not sure we got to the issue, need to review and make sure we are answering the question. And then finally, I shared my thoughts on this during the meeting, look forward to more discussion. So we have two that have addressed that. And is there a committee member that wants to kind of take from where we went to where we got to, and how that might, now that we've learned new things as well from Kerry, what modifications, if any, we might want to make?
Well, the modifications that Carrie had sent to us, are they already on the form now?
They're on the online form, yes.
That said, what we're saying is that OPD will continue its policy of removing threatening language around false crime reporting. We are doing as we want to be doing, I presume, and maybe it even gets better, but we are doing what we want to be doing. Am I wrong? So what we're asking the police to please do is to continue doing that.
Yeah, I was satisfied with what came forward. What I had seen online was one of the older forms that hadn't been removed yet because we're doing the switch over from the old website to the new website. That was the one that I thought we were dealing with, not the ones that you had brought up.
And
But
it's
we
been
already,
removed after you brought it to my attention. We pulled it.
right.
So
So I feel comfortable with what's on the form now. And I thought it actually took care of everybody's concerns, but I can only speak for me here.
Yes, I would say, yes, I'm comfortable saying, please continue to make it better. Do what you're doing and continue to have an eye out toward making it better. And that's applicable to many of the things that we talked about throughout, where the public wasn't as informed as they might be.
Also, just to address the quick follow-up by the police chief and or city administrator, if I remember correctly, though, the complaint is not going to the police chief, it's going to the city administrator. Did I remember that wrong? So
I believe that's where
addressing
it
this
goes now.
concern.
I
from the
think we're
council
talking
member.
about two different things. You're thinking of the community police board being the intermediary for
No,
complaints.
the online forms that anybody fills out goes to the city administrator. It doesn't go to the police chief, correct?
correct. it
But
now.
this
You were
is
supposed to say-
report of a crime, is it not? Am I wrong?
No, this,
The online reporting form is currently going directly to the city administrator.
Okay. Very good.
right, so
Good
that
catch.
addresses this issue that
Right.
by the police chief or city, that's the reason why we did this, right?
Yeah.
Was to go to the city administrator.
Good catch. Okay. Are we comfortable with the language as is? Are we comfortable with the process as is?
I
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. The number 5 was okay for one, but rather 1E was okay for one, but 1E is an issue for 2 others. So let me read that. The CAB wrote, this board recommends that the Common Council instruct OPD to create a search feature that allows the public to access legally shareable data on OPD's website, including, when applicable, an interpretation of these statistics. This board recommends the incident-based reporting statistics model. OPD should make every attempt to partner with other local law enforcement agencies in this initiative. And what we wrote was, OPD will create a search feature that allows the public to access legally shareable data on OPD's website, including, when applicable, an interpretation of these statistics. It is recommended that the website data include the IBRS, which is the incident-based reporting statistics, and the UCR, which are uniform crimes reports, as well as a link to the FBI database as determined by computer capabilities. OPD should continue its partnership with other local law enforcement agencies in this initiative. I want to just ask if anybody wants to chime in on, we got very specific with this. Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. A lot of the specificity came from working with Acting Chief Witzenberg and his recommendations for particularly IBRS and UCR, which are being conducted. The concern was, which I think a lot of it had to do with turnover in February, but it took a long time to get documentation to the subcommittees back during the Community Advisory Board in the winter and spring. In installing this, I think the thought process was it would be a lot quicker turnaround time, and it would be in a central location for looking for statistics.
Mhm.
And we did discuss what could and could not be given out. For example, what is active investigation, things like that. So in working with the committee and Acting Chief Witzenberg, this is where these acronyms are coming from.
Anybody want to add anything to that?
Well, also, this is already in place, is it not, Chris?
We now have a link on the website that brings them to the FBI, UCR data and IBRS, I think, as well.
Correct. So that answers the question of, it says we will create, what if we cannot? You've already have it up and running. I know we talked about 1E several times.
Yes,
I
we
think we brought it up at least 3 times talking about that. And I believe Chris was the one that came up with the idea of creating the link to the website, and Carrie, you've done it. So
Which is not to say that the UI, the user interface, might not become more accessible and easy to understand and searchable and all those other things as we move forward. It certainly will. But in the meantime, the raw information in terms of links are very much in place. The other question that was asked on that subject was who will be doing the interpretation, the CPB or some other entity? And again, what we had said, it was that the interpretation of these statistics, so OPD's websites, when applicable, and interpretation of these statistics. And quite honestly, I was at a loss for who was doing that interpretation and having that posted to the website.
I believe it was the newly formed community.
It was the
police
CPB
board
then.
Was supposed to review the statistical data along with our city
And
administrator.
then that's what would be posted to the website.
I think we can refer back to the flow chart. Isn't it on the flow chart?
Yeah, I believe you're right. I believe you're right. So it's a case of where that lands, and that lands then on the web.
And track and quantify data, create surveys pursuant to generally accepted standards or scientific surveys.
Excellent. Okay, so the next one that we need to address is one H. That is one that the question is, let me follow the conceit of this. 1H is the board recommends that the Common Council instruct OPD to affirm that all officers are required to wear their identity badge, number, name, etc. on their outermost layer of clothing at all times while on duty. And we wrote H, we said, OPD will require all officers to wear an identifier on their outermost layer of clothing, which makes clear that they are police officers, and will require the use of nameplates whenever possible.
Well, that I actually thought we changed to, it was going to be on the body camera.
I think that's right.
We changed that to the body camera because I came up with
yes,
that
I think
idea.
that's
and
right.
Chris thought that
That's
that would work.
that
Because that's
sounds
always on
very
the
much like
outermost
the case,
layer.
yes.
I was just saying, because that's always on the outermost layer.
But didn't we ultimately decide that the mechanism can be determined later as long as we have this here? It's like any which way it can be done, it's great. We just have to say it needs to be done.
Right, right.
But I don't remember what we did to, 'cause I remember talking about undercover assignments that obviously we're not going to have an undercover officer be identified. But did we need it? Did we actually need it stated in H? I don't remember.
Yeah, I honestly, Len's right, but I think you're also right that we talked about how this could be done, but ultimately it was more important that we were saying that it should be done because that's likely to be a variable down the road. But in terms of
Absolutely. yeah.
undercover police officers, does it just wind up being common sense, or do we have to institutionalize that?
We can just say require all non-undercover officers. I mean, all uniformed
Okay.
officers.
Perfect.
Thank you. I figured it was a better way to say it than what I came up with. But as far as the nameplates go, I figure technology is going to change,
Mhm.
and as long as it's able to be done, we do it and probably come up with better ways to have identifiers as time goes on.
Actually working on.
Mhm.
But as it turns out, it's not the best.
And I'm sorry, I apparently jumped over G.
Yeah, I didn't see where we had gotten to H and
I was just testing
All right,
you.
Mark, we saw it.
Testing you.
We're-
actually
we'll
didn't know
hold
we
you-
had to.
hold your feet to the fire with that one.
So what the heck? So G wouldn't feel left out. We'll go back to G. All right, and G for the CAB report is this board recommends that the Common Council instruct OPD to release a statement to its officers and to the public related to its use of any future new policing technologies. And what we wrote for G, poor G, is Common Council instructs OPD to maintain on its website a list of budgeted purchases of policing technologies. And our rationale for doing that, the rationale for making it a budgetary report. Glenn, do you
Of
remember?
not making it a budgetary report was the
Well,
justification.
that we are saying, yes.
Not putting the entire police budget out on the website. That was what we.
Well, what we wrote was instructs OPD to maintain on its website a list of budgeted purchases of policing technologies.
Correct. Whereas the original question or recommendation was they wanted all of it.
Right. It,
So we decided we're not going to put
Any
the
new-
entire
and-
police department
That's
budget out on the website. But
You
we
don't need-
decided on
People
policing.
don't want to look at the price of shoes and.
well, and also, we also didn't want to be compromising the ability of OPD, especially in working with other agencies, et cetera, around things that weren't, purchased through this. There were any number of rationale involved, so it was more clear as we define it here, and more encompassing.
I think the key word was technology.
Mhm. Now, does anyone feel that, well, let me read actually the concern that was voiced on this. Not sure I understand the issue and why this is a recommendation. Do we know the issue? Do we really want all purchases that we do on the website? Just a little background would be helpful. So, I think we probably have just answered that. And the other kind of inferred question, actually posed question, is why is this a recommendation? And the answer, as I stated, as we started the meeting, is that each of these recommendations are not ours to judge, the intention and the mindset. Ours and the rationale, ours is to provide the legal and contractual, viability and present wordsmith back to Common Council. So that's why it's there, among other reasons, basically because the CAB wanted it there. In short. Does anybody feel like there's anything that needs to be modified for that to be able to bring back to council as an actionable item for vote? No. Okay. All right. In that case, I do believe that we have pushed through letter, or rather number 1, section 1. Section 2. We have a 2A. And
I think we kind of addressed this.
I think we have, and I think we can kind of do some skipping here as well, because in the instance of the question posed, where we're asking again, what if this cannot be met? Should it, if possible? Is there reason to think that any of these recommendations that we have been offering are things that we don't think can be done?
No, I
I
think
don't-
if we thought it was impossible to do.
We wouldn't have included them.
Yeah.
Right.
Over extensively
Right.
our timelines.
And that's why, that's one of the reasons why we've taken so long, because we've gone through ways to, because some of the recommendations were
Very
not
good.
at our level of control. So I think we did go through what we could do.
It's also why we asked the acting chief to be with us to help with the processing of all the recommendations as well.
All right. So 2E is the next that we need to address. This board recommends that Common Council explore the feasibility of investing in a position for an individual to handle public relations or the creation of public information officer position dedicated to increasing transparency between OPD and the community. And
Mark, that's
that's
2E1.
I'm sorry, you know what is that what the CAB? Yeah, because we did wind up eliminating some. I might need a little help finding the.
Oh, this is about use of force.
Oh, wait a minute. No, you know what it is, Len, if we look at the questions here, they're not all in order. if we look down, I thought you were talking about the same thing.
I'm
If you go back down, it says 2E1, but then it jumps to 2C.
looking at 2E1 and it says, should we look
It's
into changing
changing,
SOPs
yeah,
to
and
SOGs? In that regard, does match up with the use of force because it
Correct.
talks about SOPs.
that's correct. So what we need to do is actually find the
I know, but look at the next one.
Yeah, it could be
Appropriate.
just a
So
it could.
if there's anybody on
might
it would,
meant to
it would be
There's a couple of
E1,
inconsistencies.
is what we wrote.
correct, and
And
we
then
did-
finding,
we did talk about the difference between a standard operating procedure and a standard operating guideline, and that's the difference between an SOP and SOG.
yeah,
We went with a P because it's a procedure and it's more defined.
right. And as we wound up combining and eliminating in this section in kind of a major way, some of these numbers don't sync up at this moment, but I think this is also a pretty verbiage heavy section, the CAB's recommendations. So if we look at what we wrote, and let's kind of reference in our mind's eye where it came from, regarding the use of force, OPD will be consistent with the letter of the law and policy guidance of the Division of Criminal Justice Services of New York State. The relative SOPs will be posted on the site. And then the question is, changing SOPs to SOGs. Basically, it's a case of what's the better to use, or would both be an appropriate thing to use.
Well, I guess to answer the council member's question, the difference between the SOP and SOG is that we went with P because it's a procedure, which means the officer has to follow it.
Right. And G is a
explain to their
guideline.
supervisor, whereas a guideline is just that they're guided by that.
Mhm.
not
So
mandated.
SOPs then are more specific in terms of action expected.
Correct,
Right. So therefore, it's got more teeth.
correct.
So we leave it where it is?
Yep.
Very good. Okay. Give me a minute to kind of reconnect to what people are looking for. C here.
I think this matches up with F in our
This is what I
report.
was talking about. We got to jump back up.
Go ahead.
So 2A.
2A.
Okay. 2A.
I'm looking at 2C. Isn't this the next one?
Yeah, I'm looking at 2C as well, recognizing the nuance of town gown.
Right.
So again, I'm going to bypass the CAB document for a little bit here, just to get this back on track. So what we had written was recognizing the nuances of town gown relationships, OPD and SUNY Oneonta will continue the exploration of options in partnering to allow for growth and relief of the services the department is providing, as well as UPD to assist professionally with their population and the community, which will benefit from a police department with fewer stressors and greater availability. What was asked of us by the council member is, could the group expand upon this, please? How does this work practically, UPD and the community? If so, I'd like to see an extension of the partnership that OPD and UPD forged during COVID via a signed agreement by UPD and the city to share responsibility and surveillance of neighborhoods with high density of off-campus student housing. So this isn't so much a request to modify our recommendation as it is for clarification of how specifically it works and whether or not that's something that we in fact have an MOU or some kind of a contract in place on.
We have an MOU that exists for mutual aid in an emergency situation. But the reality is the university police as a whole have a very varied policy as to how they respond off campus for routine matters, and is currently under review by their interim police chief and his supervision. I don't know that we have any control over asking them to respond jointly with us to matters of routine calls for service in the city.
So the answer then is basically this is a work in progress.
This is a work in progress.
And there may be a time where there's something more defined that can be,
I would hope that at some point we would be able to, but I can't, as they're a state agency and
Sure.
local, I can't speak for them.
but what we have currently is a partnership, a working partnership, loose as it may be, that's better than what we previously had.
We're pretty much back to what we previously had with a bit more fusion between our ability to communicate with university police and their student conduct people.
So I don't know that there's any requirement for us to modify our language. And I think our council member that posed the question has heard the conversation, so that may make it something that's easier to find its way toward a vote. Moving on to 2D, I guess it is. And again, I'm absolutely going to just bypass our CAB document for now. Common Council will encourage OPD to invest in training of individuals to handle public relations and public information to increase transparency between OPD and the community. And the question posed, I want to make sure that's the only one on that subject. It is. The question posed is interested in the budget implications. How are we funding this? Not opposed at all, just concerned with where the money is coming from. Maybe this is a liaison position at the broader city level, since we could all benefit from greater and more streamlined communications. And go ahead, Dave.
I think what we have is the council member that presented this question. It's a good question. I think what they're offering is a possible solution, when I think what we might want to do for now is, if we, with this recommendation, what jumps out at me is it's to encourage OPD to invest in training. So I think what'll happen, what I would expect, is it would come, a plan would come forward in the budget process. And if it's a decent plan, I would expect the council then to back them up and say, all right, let's do this. I think what the council member offered is one of possibly many solutions. So, but I would recommend we stick with what we're recommending, since it's got to be broad for now, with this as one possible.
And we had to talk, just for a little bit more background on it. We had talked about the creation of a liaison, of a PR person, a information officer. The cost of that relative to the idea of training multiple individuals to essentially have that skill at any given time and be able to step out, not only as educators in the community, but also in a circumstance where the police need to be ably represented.
That's the plan for me, is to get as many people trained in public information officer as I can. There's other things as far as community programming that we're looking at also. It really is just a matter of when the trains become available and have
H, there are a couple of concerns from different council members expressed for H, which, as we have it, is recognizing the importance. I wonder, Terry, if you may have a more up-to-date version of this document that I'm working from. I'm seeing my red here, and I'm thinking that certainly wasn't the final document. So bear with me for a quick second. Yeah. Very nice. H, recognize the importance of our offices also being members of our community. This board recommends that the Common Council explore offering additional assistance and incentives to officers looking to live in the city, as well as continuing to offer PSLF student loan forgiveness program opportunities and the ability to work towards college credits while on the job. The two concerns posed were, one, how does this impact extend to undercover assignments? Is that right? Yes, that is right. And I'm all aboard for this. Do we have any ideas what these incentives might be? I'd like to see them applied broadly to all city employees, especially because this isn't union negotiated benefit, but one we'd be offering freely to specific subset of employees, which wouldn't be equitable as an employer. Katie? Hi. The idea of it being equitable, broad-based rather than specific, is that something you want to, can you address that just?
Sure, I mean, I think in general, here we're talking about the police department, so of course our conversation has been specific to the police department, so I think the recommendation is specific to police officers. I think in general, based on some of the, the commentary I've heard from the council is that there may be a broader discussion about city residency for all employees, and I think that in general, not to go down a rabbit hole, but when we talk about incentivizing residency, we're talking about the housing issue, which has been identified in a variety of other matters. So I really think that this initiative, while it's important, is a much broader conversation than what we've been talking about. So, in terms of any specific incentives, I don't know who made the comment, but they're absolutely right that compensation or terms and condition of employment are a mandatory subject of negotiation under the Taylor law, so that would have to be negotiated with our public safety unions as well as any other employee that would apply to. So I don't know if any of that's really helpful, if I really said anything, but in general, I think that it's a broader conversation that should occur outside of this context.
So that caveat now added, is there, for the benefit of council, and yes, go ahead.
If we know that any benefit like this is going to have to be addressed through union negotiation, what we're offering here is the common council explore offering and then the rest. So it's not that we're offering right now, but we would explore it, and we know already that we would have to do that through negotiations down the road anyway. So I think the first step, though, is to explore what we possibly can do.
So with that, the language that we have here seems pretty defensible and something we can.
I think
bring
it's
forward.
okay. I think we just have to stress that this is strictly talking about starting the process forward, exploring what's possible, and then the next time we have a union negotiation, bring forward what we're able to do.
Lynn, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'm just been rereading H here, and so when I get to, in the first sentence, comma, this board recommends, and it says this board, we're talking about Cabrc.
This board recommends, that was Cabrc, yes.
To
Yes.
H, or to, yeah, to H, first sentence.
So I think we might have.
Yeah, I think we need to lose,
I think we need to change that.
yes, that's
I
correct.
was just wondering if we should remove comma, this board recommends, and just go with recognizing the importance of our officers also being members of our community. The common council continue exploring to offer additional assistance and incentives to officers looking to live in the city.
Yeah, I'd say I'd be inclined to simply remove the word board and write instead, it is recommended that, and make the recommendation less subject specific.
If you read recommends, then you got to define who's recommending, so.
The common council will explore.
Yeah, the common council will explore, in any event, I would change very little of that. I would change just.
Right, I would just suggest removing this board recommends that,
Yep, and then will after council in between explore.
so that it reads also being members of our community, the common council will explore offering additional.
So essentially cross out those 4 words, pick it up with the word the before common council after the comma, and that should
And
be.
after council will say will.
If we're gonna change that, there's one other thing. Do we need to be more specific and say recognizing the importance of our police officers versus just our
Rather than our
officers?
officers.
Am I being picky?
I think it's, I mean, it's obviously in the police review community review document relative to the police, but
But it's a recommendation more for.
yeah, why
us
not
than the
add it?
Police department,
sure.
so it could be interpreted differently.
We're going to be modifying that language in a few words down the road anyway on that sentence, so may as well add that to the beginning. So police officers. All agree, all favorable to that?
Yep.
But I just
Something-
want to point out, I think part of what's coming along with this, though, is encouraging police officers to live in the city and looking at where all these recommendations came from. If we're able to encourage and be successful encouraging more officers to live in the city, having officers living in the neighborhoods, it makes it easier for neighbors to get to know the police officers.
Right.
I think when I was growing up, I had 4 police officers in my neighborhood. And like, we all knew them. It was great.
Couldn't get away with anything.
No, and we couldn't get away with anything either.
So yeah, that's an inferred value, and I'm glad you brought that up. But outside of that modification, those 2 modifications to H, we are good to recommend this as part of the final package to council.
So I guess back to Dave, are you suggesting that we put police officers in the first sentence along with police officers? And like, I guess it basically I'm going to identify as the 3rd line down.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think that, but I guess so, yeah. So it would read, recognizing the importance of our police officers also being members of our community, the Common Council will explore offering additional assistance and incentives to
Our police officers.
those police officers.
I
or
think
two
you're fine
police
leaving it.
officers.
It's just, honestly, I think you're fine with just officers.
Okay.
We've already referenced them once.
Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Either way, it's fine.
Yeah, I think we're fine. Becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back. One more word.
Yeah.
So we're good to move off of 2H then?
Yeah.
Very good. All right, then again, in our council members' comments, we go to 2I. Again with the language. Council will direct to continue to try to maybe develop, do we direct them to do it or not? That is actually, I think, a reasonable, it's a cute way to put it, but I think it's a reasonable question about our, how imperative our language is versus how, it is, I don't want to say wishy-washy, it's not, but we are encouraging rather than saying do in many cases.
So this is 2I, yes?
Yes, to
Yeah.
So it reads, the council will direct OPD to continue development of a board relating to community solutions to help strengthen partnership with community and social service providers. That seems pretty active.
Yeah.
And so, what would have been good if I'd have read that out loud first? So I broke my own rule and it come to bite me in the butt. So I'm not certain that I is applicable necessarily to the council members mention of that, except maybe the fact that it is in this particular recommendation direct as opposed to other recommendations where it's encouraged.
We said we're directing them.
Yes, exactly. So in this particular case, this is a recommendation that can just go as it is, and it was a matter of bringing our attention to the fact that it's not always consistent.
Yeah,
That we're
it's good
saying
to be-
direct
it's good
or
to use-
encourage.
Active voice over passive when we can help it. This was a nice, strong.
I'm going to actually go back to the written word here. For J, Common Council will advocate, this is what we wrote, Common Council will advocate for greater mental health resources, working with groups such as Otsego County Mental Health to make resources available for officers access on demand. If resources are unavailable, OPD and the city should consider advocating for county, state, and federal aid for individuals suffering from mental health crises, including substance abuse. The council member here writes, it seems to me that the object of this statement is a moving target. Are we talking about resources for officers at the beginning or the public at the end? Certainly hoping the officers aren't suffering from substance abuse. So that's a grammatical concern. So let's take another look at our writing.
I thought our intention was for the public, for the officers to be. able
Yes,
to
it was
access
not for the
mental health.
officers.
Yes.
That's correct. Yes. So if the subject has not become confused in the writing, we should clear it. We should clean that up. So should that be community members, public, where it says individuals, rather than it saying individuals that non-specifically addressing whether it's police or public? Should we just call it the community or the public?
I would say yes to community members.
Where are you looking to put
Last,
that?
Second to the last sentence,
That's correct.
far right. After federal aid. Do you need to clean it up above, Mark, on the second sentence, far right? Or no, second line, far right, to make resources available? That does get confusing when I read it today.
yeah, well, I suppose as a tool, because what we're saying, those resources are being made available as a tool for the officers' access, as opposed to the treatment of the officers.
Right, I get how the council member
Yeah.
got to their
Yeah.
statement when I read that today.
So both of those things, let's clean up where we say individuals and make that, are we okay with the word community? Or on the second to last line at the very far end,
Community members?
where it says
What we're saying?
we can make that community members, certainly.
I think community members would make sense.
And then cleaning up the verbiage to make resources available for officers' access on demand. So the synonym or synonym that I came up with were, rather than resources, were, more identifiable as tools. But maybe that doesn't do well to replace the word resources.
What if we just?
You're on the second line down, right hand, 3 words.
Dave, were you going to strike to make resources available for officers' access on demand?
I was thinking striking for officers' access on demand and say to make resources available, maybe for OPD's usage, like try to be more broad with it, but
If we strike that, it just cleans it up. Common Council will advocate for greater mental health resources, working with groups such as Otsego County Mental Health. If resources are unavailable, OPD and city should consider advocating for county, state, and federal aid for individuals suffering.
when you read it like that, Len, it made it seem almost like a redundant, part of it was redundant.
So we can gain by subtraction here.
Yeah, I would agree.
So we're going to end that at
Sentence at mental health.
mental health, period. We're going to
Yep.
cross out to make resources available to officers' access on demand. And then we'll pick it back up with if resources.
Is by striking that or leaving it in, I definitely see how the
Yeah.
Common Council members
Sure.
got to that.
All right, so Carrie, you're following along the bouncing ball here?
And just to be clear, Mark, and we're also striking individuals and subbing in with community members. Yes.
We're not striking that, we are replacing individuals with community members. Maybe that's what you just said.
Yes.
All right, very good. I think we've taken care of 2 sections and starting to make some progress here. Section 3 is there is one concern with the letter A. And as we look at letter A here, it is, I'm just gonna bypass our cab stuff unless we need to come back to it. It is recommended that Common Council establish a community police board as defined in section 4, subsection A, that in conjunction with other duties will examine the relationship that exists between the arrests of persons of color and the minority population, and implement procedures with council and community input to remedy any identified or contributory issues. And I'll read the council member's comment is, I'm reserving opinion about a community police board pending clarification of duties, authorities, required training, see zoning and planning requirements, ability to implement or require procedure changes versus recommendations to council. Does anyone want to jump in on this, or shall I? Go ahead, Luke.
I think especially reading our flow chart, I think the responsibilities and duties are relatively clear, especially after we went through with the help of Katie and Greg with the additions that are in red on here. But it noted that this council member would like to discuss this more. But in my opinion, again, I've been heavily involved with this as of all of us. That's just my thought on it.
No, I think that our flow chart is pretty robust.
It's not the flow chart, it's Appendix B where we have a policy and it talks about what's required, correct? Or am I missing something?
I think it's
No,
also,
you're
you're right,
correct.
but it's also included in the flow chart, but yes.
Yeah. I think it's spelled out very well.
Now, the required training piece isn't something I think that we ever considered that the community police board would require any training.
Well, they ultimately don't have power versus some of our boards that do, like zoning and planning, that have to go for training that's required by state law. Ultimately, anything that's done is going back through, or decided is going back through the city administrator and then to the council, and also HR. So I don't know what training would necessarily be available or would be appropriate.
I'd agree, and I think that Greg, you will be having the conversation most likely regularly around what the parameters, expectations, responsibilities, et cetera, are with this board, as you won't just be a liaison to the board, to the community police board, but you'll also be providing some direction relative to the council's expectation and the police department's expectations and the community's expectations. Does that sound right to everybody?
Well, I'm like David, I'm trying to think of what training that they would need, because you're right, I hadn't thought of that component, so I just don't want to skip it.
I mean, there may very well wind up being seminars and other opportunities to be connecting to folks for best practices out of other cities, et cetera. And I suspect that that'd be something that the city would be supportive of them being engaged in. And I suppose that's training.
I don't know that we could necessarily require it though,
No.
since it's not, they don't have their decision-making is not law.
Right.
Correct. So,
We are clear on that, right?
yes,
Yes.
I think we are. So with that, I believe that we are comfortable moving forward and on to other recommendations. C, in the same section 3, there's just a quick question about whether or not it's permitted by civil service law, and I'll read what we wrote. It is recommended that the Common Council instruct OPD in conjunction with any necessary city staff members or departments to explore financial bonuses for multilingual officers based on the language needs of the city as identified in the community needs assessment as prepared by Opportunities for Otsego, while also developing relationships with minority police organizations for the mentorship of candidates, i.e. National Latino POA, National Black POA, National Asian POA, IAWP, and or the use of language resources such as LEP or in the technologies. And again, it was just a comment, was not sure if this is permitted by civil service law. And so I'm going to ask Katie to chime in.
So language, I mean, the short answer is yes, that it is permitted by civil service law, and oftentimes, there's a process for developing multilingual officers or multilingual titles. It's done in a lot of different places. Civil service has to administer for language proficiency exams for a variety of other languages, and of course, Spanish folks in different areas are used depending on the needs of the community. So yes, it can be done. I think it was just important that I think the conversation that we had was about identifying what language needs were, so that the city wouldn't be incentivizing. I think we brought up the example of somebody who can speak Irish Gaelic or something like that, and where the need be there. But yes, it is permissible under civil service law. There's just a process that the commission would have to undertake in order to adopt the stipend or the title or the exam that would be needed in order to test for proficiency.
Thank you, Katie. Anything else for Katie on that subject? Good. Thank you very much, Katie. So again, now I think we're in a place where we can move forward in among these recommendations. The agreed?
Yes.
The section 4. There was an issue about Roman numerals and Arabic numerals, and I think Carrie will just make sure that I'll take a look at it and you'll double check and we'll see where I was wrong. Section 4, the comment, we're not going to go through all of section 4 here, is that the entire section requires council discussion, clear direct decisions regarding the legal status as an advisory committee or one with delegated powers. I think what's important is that we make a presentation maybe at that point, maybe earlier at council for the benefit of the folks that are in attendance as well, of how the community police board is set up to work. And with our doing that, that would probably answer not only many of the council's questions, but also many of the community's questions. Everybody is still comfortable with our setup of the community police board as we've. Good. In that case, we are moving on to section 5. The entire council, whoops, DCD is okay. Actually, we may not need to move. Oh, yes, it is. Okay. 5.5, it looks like. 5.5, yes. So the Common Council. I'm sorry. I didn't see that there was a 5. There's a section 5A and a section 5B that are also called into question. So let me go to those first. So A, what we had written, section 5, the city of Oneonta resolves that it will work toward examining and developing a framework for a more effective and equitable drug policy in line with scientific and medical advancements. This council member wrote, in my notes, I wrote, what the heck does this mean? And after racking my brain, trying to think of it a different way to ask it, I'm sticking with that question. Additionally, we're missing a period at the end of the sentence. So the period we can fix. So can somebody, the question is, what the heck does this mean? Thank you, Luke.
Yeah, so this was going back to old modalities of thinking of drug use as, not necessarily going back to this, but essentially a behavioral choice, a poor judgment of the past, and now more of a medical modality. So things like keeping up with federal trends, state trends, and enforcing, particularly actually when this was written, there was talk about legalization of cannabis in the state, which is, has come to pass. So this is kind of the framework of thinking of addiction as a medical as opposed to a purely behavioral or choice driven issue, I think was kind of the core of this, and making sure that we're treating it as a medical issue.
So is everyone comfortable with if this then is brought up in council as a question, what the heck does this mean? That Luke, your answer is one that not only sounds good to everybody, but you'll provide.
If you let me.
Happy to have you do it.
Do you have the ability to go back to the cab notes? To the cab
Yes, I
recommendation for
do.
this?
I do, in fact, yes, because it's a lot less. I tell you though, it's been a challenge between the cross outs and to try to read underneath all my scribbles from the
Right.
original. But yes, I can go back to the original A, and that was that the board recommends the city of Oneonta adopt a policy such as the blueprint for public health and safety approach to drug policy, published by the New York Academy of Medicine and Drug Policy Institute. See Appendix 1 in this document for a link to the full document. The proposed strategy centers around adopting a health and safety approach based on a 4-pillar strategy of prevention, treatment, and recovery, harm reduction, and public safety. And again, we are writing that we will work toward examining and developing a framework for a more effective and equitable drug policy in line with scientific and medical advancements. So we're not jumping on the bones of this, and locking ourselves into this kind of specificity, because I think we talked about as a committee, things change and other opportunities and avenues and education are likely to present themselves. So still comfortable with it. Good. Any other discussion on this? Good. Okay, B. I do have the ability to go back to the cabin for old time's sake. We can do that. Section V5, the board recommends that the city of Oneonta explore the feasibility both operationally and financially, including examining creative funding resources of incorporating personnel to form a mental health and substance abuse first responder unit, who would work in coordination and in conjunction with typical fire, EMS, and police response when necessary. And what we took that down to was B, the Common Council will explore the feasibility of incorporating personnel of a mental health and substance abuse first responder units working in coordination and conjunction with typical fire, EMS, and police response when necessary. I'm going to, we know how we got here. I'm going to go to the council person's question, which was, are we sending this personnel out on certain types of calls? How do we screen for that practically? Never having been a dispatcher, he guessed that it's near impossible to figure out what necessity over the phone in most cases. Lieutenant, can you talk about this a little bit?
There's a lot of initiatives currently in play, like 811, for instance, which is essentially a takeoff of 911, which is a crisis hotline that's going nationally. That dispatchers will ultimately be trained on a question rubric in order to determine whether or not someone is in immediate need of mental health counseling or intervention from a police agency. That is something that we will be looking at trying to incorporate at our level. I think 911 is already in the process. We have we're hoping in November, tablets that are actually going to allow us to interface with a mental health professional remotely and from the scene. So we would have them with us at the scene to be able to have people speak with a mental health professional face to face, essentially, right on scene. So there's things that we are working on, and we're, the mental health profession is also looking at exploring things as well. But we're working with a community outreach worker, SPOA, which is a single point of access, through the solutions panel. We've been exchanging information. All these things were, the infrastructure hasn't been there for mental health and hasn't been there for us. And, as we change our tact, things start to fuse a little bit better. So there are things in play.
Very good. Anybody have any other questions for the lieutenant? No. All right. So then with that, do we see any need to modify our language here in our recommendation? All right, now I've got a couple of things that were written that are not specific to any recommendations that we should just be aware of and potentially able to answer.
Or do you want to do number 5 now.
Oh. I'm glad you got my wing here. Yes, so let's go to number. Yeah, so it's the fact that it's written as a 5 that's got me confused. Yes, E. And this would be what the CAB had written. Thank you, Lynn. What the CAB had written was common council should consider creating a city mental health substance abuse department, potentially in collaboration with neighboring municipalities to pool resources to support this function. And what we had written, bear with me. What we had written was 5E, the Common Council will work with OPD to adopt a strategy to treat addiction and mental health issues as social issues as opposed to criminal ones, and set policy to direct officers to use discretion when working with individuals suffering from substance abuse who are not posing a threat to themselves, others, or the property of others. Does anything seem out of sync on that? No. Okay. Luke, Dave, anything you want to speak to? Relative to how we got from here to there, Len?
I guess I'm not seeing the question.
Yeah, the question, well, the question is addiction, I'm sorry, let me read that question. Addiction and mental health are clearly opposed, not clearly opposed to crime. I assume the police will remain focused on crime intervention. Of course, impaired or mentally handicapped individuals should be rendered appropriate care and prevention of self-injury by police and not subject to abuse or mistreatment. So you're right.
So the question is back into opposed. So the number 5, the council members saying it's not clearly opposed to crime, whereas we're saying in our statement that the mental health issues and social issues, as opposed to criminal ones, that they set a policy to direct the officers to use discretion. So we did address.
Yeah, and I think it's just how that word opposes is being read by the council member.
I think maybe they were thinking it
was against.
We were implying it was one or the other. Or well, actually, I don't know what I'm saying here.
Well, no, because we are saying that adopt a strategy to treat addiction and mental health issues as social issues as opposed to criminal ones.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just, it's not meaning that it's against criminal ones.
Right.
It means in relation to criminal ones.
Yes.
It's not that.
Right.
Right. And Chris gave us quite a few examples of the difference between the act of a crime while using a substance compared to just having a substance issue.
Yes.
Clearly defined multiple scenarios for us.
So I feel like the word was just misinterpreted by the council member, but I feel like what we've written stands up, and I'd be inclined to let it go.
I think so too. And if this council member still has the question, I'm not sure, can't remember who wrote it exactly, but, or if they're here or not, then I think we can pretty easily defend it during
Good.
council.
All right, that, Lennon, tell me if I'm wrong. That should take us through all of the recommendations. However, we do have 2 overriding concerns that I want to just address. One was this council member was worried about timeframes. If we're saying by 2 months after approval, and we don't make it, what then? We still need to discuss concerns about making a committee, et cetera. I think we've already maybe talked about that some. The community police board will make a presentation as to how that works, and hopefully the clarification of that will be enough. But the idea of what happens if the council says 2 months, Dave?
These are just guidelines we're setting for ourselves, like any of us set our own guidelines for or our own goals, whether it's at work or in life. And we need to put something that we think is realistic, and we try to meet that. If we don't meet the goal, we do like what we've had to do with this group here. We've gone over the time period. We just get it done. We just keep working at it.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a timeframe police that's gonna come and,
That's our next committee.
but we'll do the best we can.
So yes, so I think you're right. Personally, I think what we're establishing here, what the CAB established are various goals. And what we're asking the council to do is to essentially approve benchmarks that we would hope that these goals may be 100% met, or if not, where are we relative to?
And, when we talk about this with the council, if a council member feels a specific goal needs more time, they could certainly present their case and we could adjust it if we're all in agreement that, hey, they pointed something out that we didn't think of and they're right. So.
All right, so I feel like we are all simpatico on this.
Yeah.
Lastly, a concern about the the need for a liaison from the council to the community police board, that it should not just be the city administrator, that the liaison should be a council member like other boards, zoning, housing, arts, etc. And we did have quite a bit of discussion around this. Does anybody want to tackle the reason? Go ahead, Dave.
I clearly remember, well, at least my reason for not doing it. I think this is a very different board compared to all our other boards and commissions. And I think putting a council member on as a liaison, it will either invite bias or invite the thought that there could be bias. And I think, and that's from all political angles. So I thought it was much better to keep the council members completely off of it. And I think having the city administrator and HR involved, it's a much more, it was the way to go.
And the city administrator functioning essentially as the liaison while also taking direction from the council to bring back
Right.
to that community police board is a cleaner line. The city administrator is not actually a voting member of the community police board. So it really winds up being a liaison in effect, but also an information and resource person reconnecting with the common council's directive.
Exactly.
Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, I think the city administrator is working on the behalf of the city government in this particular role. I think we did discuss that at length. And I see where the council member is coming from, that almost every other board has a liaison to it, but
I think we originally said we were going to do that when
We
we
did.
first brought it up and we're discussing the formation of it.
That's right. But after much discussion, we landed where we landed. And I feel like it's a very defensible argument we can make as to why it's that cleaner line of the city administrator. The reporting is not going to suffer, certainly, to common council. And that said, I think that when we make the clear understanding to all of how the community police board works, what its expectations are, what they are able to do and unable to do, and all, a lot of this will become less of an issue for some council members, maybe not all, but certainly most, I think. And that will move this thing to a place where we can say aye or nay.
I guess, is that a point, Mark, that I guess if 5 council members want to have a council member liaison, that we take that particular thing to vote, or?
They might. I mean, I don't see why I would imagine that almost any recommendation here would probably, because it's council approval that we're looking for. And if anyone here knows that I'm wrong here, let me know. But I would imagine that any individual recommendation could wind up being altered by a majority of council.
So I guess that kind of leads me into the question of, is this a take it or leave it document, or is this, we're going to break it down document?
I think I assumed that this was going to be brought forward to the council as a motion for discussion.
Right.
Whether we pick it apart or pick something out to adjust or vote on separate, I just honestly, I don't know about that or how we would do that. I think that's more.
Well,
of a
could this
question for
be,
Dave
could
Mercer.
this be handled almost like it was, consent? And without having somebody have to read through 68 pages, and then allow council members who have an issue because they've had this in hand to pull any individual recommendation for discussion while
I
pushing
actually
forward
wanted
the
to go
full.
back to the mayor's, as he sits here in the gallery, and just refresh our memory of what you charged this committee with. Was it just that, Gary? It was just a document that we hand over to the full council as a whole, or that they get to go through it?
The charge was to create a plan to implement the CAB's recommendations, of course, to the extent that they're feasible. I think what your document is just that. Your document is a plan to implement that. The council will vote yes or no. Each individual council member will vote yes or no on this document, on this plan. Now, there is no doubt that not every single council member is going to be in lockstep agreement on every single item in the plan. However, each council member can decide whether there is enough in the plan that they object to vote the whole document. If 5 council members, or actually 4 council members, vote it down, then we've got a problem. We'll figure out how to handle it then. But my expectation is to get this approved does not require all 8 council members to be in lockstep agreement with every item in the document. I mean, we often, as individuals, vote to approve something because compromise is the way we operate. And if you have a long document here with 50 recommendations and you have a minor disagreement with one of them, I would hope you would not and recognize that it's not expected that everybody's going to agree with every recommendation or every step, everything. It's not a recommendation, every directive.
Right, so that's kind of my point is, as you're directing this on the agenda for the council meeting, are you going to allow the council member to say, well, I'm good with 90% of this, but recommendation to whatever, I'm not good, and then allow that to open the door to where they've got to seek out at least a majority, right? 5 to say yes. I'm just trying to figure this, how this path is going to go.
The way typically a vote works is that we have discussion. Discussion doesn't necessarily mean discussion. Discussion means each person can express their opinion in the hope that they may sway others to vote against it if they're opposed to it. In the end, we're going to vote on the document as it is. We're not going to, unless somebody makes a move to amend the document and it's seconded and a majority agree upon that.
Okay.
We're not going to go there. I would say people's opportunity for discussion is to express their feelings about it, to express any areas that they disagree with. If 4 other people or 3 other people their eyes are open by what was said and they disagree with it, and that's enough to vote no, then that's what happens. No, we vote on the document as it is unless the majority of the council moves to change it.
I think we've also worked very hard, this group here, to come to an agreement on each one of these items. So ultimately, what we're looking for is at least one more council member to come along. So I would assume if we walk out of this today and we're all satisfied with this, that we all know that we're all satisfied, that we'll have 4 yes votes for it, to accept it at the council meeting. So we only need 1 more. Hopefully we'll have 4 more.
So for my clarification, we bring this forward, there's discussion. In discussion, are they concerned about, let's just say, the liaison to the community police board is something that generates some traction? Someone at that point can make a call to make an amendment to the document.
We could, and it would have to be seconded, and then a majority of the council will have to vote to agree with making that amendment. Which
And
I
then
don't
we
think
would
You're
come-
going to have, because you have 4 people who are happy with the document as it is now, gone over it numerous times to make sure that you're happy with it. You know, I think of it like, well, first let me back up. You know, let's think about the fact that every these meetings have been open, they've been ongoing, they've been on Zoom, when the person opened the public here, every council member should have the opportunity to participate. And I know that many said at the beginning of the process that they wanted to participate. And said, even though I'm not appointed, can I participate? And the answer is yes. So, I think that it would be unfortunate for council members to have the opportunity to participate all through, to now want to dissect the document and make wholesale changes, because that opportunity has existed all through the process.
Just as a point of clarification, Mayor, the structure of this, as we tried to get it done in our lifetimes, was to have the input from the lieutenant and from a personnel director, and then open up the floor to any questions or comments from attending council members. And then that ended, we would then take it to committee and primarily kept it within committee unless we had a question in our conversation that required opinion being solicited. So that was the way that council members, the other 4 council members, were integrating into the conversation.
You know, let me add the one thing that I would say could have meaningful impact before it's voted on is the public hearing. In the unlikely event that there is a meaningful outcry from the public after reviewing your document, and that resonates with the council, then it would be appropriate to reconsider.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. All right, any other, go ahead, Len.
I would like to put Councilmember Katie Leparshu on a hot seat. And since you said that we would open this up, it looks like John took off. Out of hearing what we've said today, is there anything that you would like to raise?
I just had a couple of follow-up questions to the questions, that you guys went through. I don't know if it's appropriate to do it now. I think it would be beneficial to Luxembourg was here, but if you want me to hold them for the council meeting, that's fine.
I think we're fine.
Okay, on 1H, which is the bullet about clearly identifying yourself as an officer and the groups that are learning to become an officer, which makes sense. My question is about detectives at grade. Are they considered undercover, or would they be subject to?
They're almost always in a plainclothes capacity.
Right.
For a reason. Soft clothing makes it easier for us to approach people than, let's say, schools, for instance. When we go to a school, we'll often lead with a detective simply because it's a less visible approach and often cools things down.
Okay.
So yeah, the detectives would be, if they're in plainclothes, exempt.
Okay, so they wouldn't have to have their name on them as well.
No.
Okay. 2C is with regard to UPD. I raised that question. I obviously want to do some follow-up on that, but I don't think I have anything for this group. I just would like to see, and it sounds like something that most people would like to see them support the OPD a little bit more.
We would like to see that too. That may be something that posing that to the college administration would be appropriate.
Okay, thanks. So 2D, which is with regard to the public information officer, you had alluded, I'm not sure who in the room did, to start doing a cost benefit analysis of training many officers versus hiring one person and that's their role. I guess my question is it more cost effective? Is that how you came to that decision, or was there some other rationale?
Well, I think, and I've said this a bunch of times during our meetings, that I expect all of my officers to represent the police department in the way I would expect them to. And having them all trained in some way as public information officers and being able to deliver, at community groups or whatever else, and function on a community level is really important. So having the individual officer that's on the street interacting and interfacing with the community, I think is far more cost effective than having one particular person, especially in this area. You can have a public information officer that's creating television commercials. We just don't have the resources in this community, especially given our access to media and other things to be. Could we be putting together social media bits? Yeah, that's possible. But I think I'd be more apt to see my officers push into the community more once we're at staff.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. With 2H, there was one question that I don't feel was covered thoroughly. It was not my question, but I thought it was a good one. With regard to incentives for officers residing within the city, how does this impact undercover officers? Because they would be integrated into the community at that point, so people would know that they're a police officer. I'm assuming if we're that person was. going with that question.
We don't typically use our own officers as undercover officers. We have other assets in place for that, so.
Okay, that's a great solution. Cool. And then for the group, I did raise the question about 5A, and now I have a greater understanding of it. It sounds like to me, 5A and 5B are potentially redundant at that point. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
So what we were doing was referencing the initial CAB document. And in doing that, it was a matter of distilling what we felt was the core of the recommendation in both cases. There's slight nuance. Agreed, you could make a case for that could probably be combined, but I feel that we're probably okay with where we landed on it. Does anyone disagree?
Go ahead.
I was also going to say, and letter A is also indirectly referencing a particular modality that we discussed. It's the 4 pillars of, oh dear, it's in the CAB report
Right,
itself.
right.
And
Prevention, treatment, and recovery, harm reduction, and public safety.
Exactly. And so that, and with the risk of mentioning that specifically, it's pretty current, but things do go out of date depending on what happens when. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. I think it was in
Gotcha.
the report.
In the packet. I
Yes.
did. Yep.
I
just didn't pick up that because it was referenced indirectly. I didn't know that that's.
Yes,
exactly what
and the
we
reason I
recommended.
believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we did that was because the spirit of it was something that the CAB appreciated, but referencing that specific report runs the risk of it becoming out of date, there being errors with it, things like that,
Gotcha.
I think.
Okay.
I
Okay.
also,
Oh, sorry,
hold
no,
on a second.
please. I'm
I
sorry,
also
Bob.
look at A and B as one is more of a drug policy and the other one is more of a personnel policy.
A and E.
A and B.
I'm talking about A and E.
Oh,
I'm sorry, you're talking about what?
E
I thought you
as
said
in
B.
elephant.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Oh, E.
I thought
thought you said B.
I thought you said A too. So strike everything I said.
Yeah, A and E. A is an apple, E is an elephant.
A and E, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha. All right.
so after listening to how we approached E, are you good with that?
yeah, I think Luke's explanation about A, I guess makes sense. Let me just reread them because it sort of, I just want to make sure that I'm really sure. Yeah, no, I guess it sounds like E is doing the work of A, if that makes sense. Like, if we're looking at examining and developing a framework, then working to adopt a strategy to treat addiction and mental health issues as social issues as opposed to criminal ones, isn't that A in practice?
I think E is part of A. I don't know that necessarily A is part of E.
Yes.
Because A could be so much more.
But I think that's a pretty accurate distinction. The first is setting up the premise, and by the time we get to E, we're talking about the implementation.
Okay, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just, like you said, kind of wordsmithing.
Well, I think it's a
right?
good point that you bring up though, so.
Thank you. And then the only other thing I would say is, I know you guys were working pretty hard to, it was me who asked the question about, are we talking about officers or the public? I think that I haven't read, you know, obviously you guys were all scribbling your sort of updated language, so I'm not entirely sure where you landed on that statement. I think that just for your consideration, when you rework that statement, my understanding from that discussion is that we are trying to make resources available for officers' use sort of during calls, right, with people. And so I think that adding that language of, what did I say?
You're referring to 2J.
I'm
correct?
sorry, yeah, I didn't write down the number. so
Yes,
I-
2J, we're talking about health.
Yeah, do you mind? That's faster than my phone. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Okay, we're gonna.
So what we have down, you're looking at,
Yeah, if you can read my.
Okay,
We
yes.
had ended it at Otsego County Mental Health. We had removed to make resources available for officers' access on demand. As we were referencing that in the second sentence, which states if resources are unavailable, OPD and the city should consider advocating for county, state, and federal aid for community members.
Okay, so that makes a certain
So,
amount, I mean, that definitely makes more sense toward, you know, what you guys were saying. I think there is a certain amount of knowledge that you need to have when you read that statement to know what you're talking about. So the only thing that I would say is, if you want me to understand that these resources are, and I'm gonna borrow the language that you cut, for officers' access to use when they are aiding community members, that I would just add that language.
We'd actually, what we decided to do was to strike the clause in its entirety to make resources available for officers' access on demand. We could go back
Right.
to it if the committee wants to and modify it, but
I guess what I'm saying is, saying how they're using those resources clears up the question of, are they using it for themselves or for community members? Do you know what I mean?
right, so I hope that, I'm pretty sure Luke wrote down, we're also crossing out individuals and putting community members. So that identifies what the resources are being used for.
Gotcha. Okay.
If you couldn't read that, I apologize.
No, I could,
Atrocious handwriting.
I followed right along. Thank
Okay.
you, Luke.
Yep.
Okay, that was all I had, so thank you for giving me that.
no, thank you very much. I can appreciate that.
Definitely, the conversations smoother from my chair on Tuesday, so.
Great.
Yeah.
That's excellent. All right, with that, again,
Talk a little bit about the process and schedule going forward. So that, I think, I don't know that we have agreement on how. So, the original plan was, well, I shouldn't say original plan as of the most recent plan was that the public hearing was scheduled for next week. Have we canceled that?
Not firmly, no.
Okay.
Nope.
So I would like us to stay on track and have the public hearing next week. Anybody have a problem with that?
Well, we're here today addressing common council members' concerns. I thought that we would turn over a clean copy of what we've made changes back to the common council members that are not part of this committee, allow them to reread it. And that would give them the opportunity to say, yes, I'm good with it, or no, I'm not. But at least they would have that time period. Then we would go to the public hearing, because the common council members have had an opportunity to review the clean copy. Then we go to the public hearing, and then we vote on it.
And that public hearing is a full week from today. So Carrie, we could get that into council hands. The modifications are not many,
Correct.
probably tomorrow.
Well, I see it as a reason not to do them both simultaneously. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm saying that.
So I didn't want the council members to see the document the same night we're doing the public hearing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. If we can get this out, there's no reason we can't get this out by tomorrow. It goes out to the public tomorrow. It goes out to the council. Of course, it's still a draft because it's not approved by the council.
Sure.
It goes out as a draft to the public. We have the public hearing next Tuesday. After the public hearing, we can then, instead of having, an open discussion, which we saw how that went last week, we had trouble getting anywhere on it. After the public hearing, council would have had a chance to review the final document after their input was received. They would have had an opportunity to hear from the public. The way I would approach it would be to ask any council members if they have any specific requests, any requests for specific changes to the document at that time. They've heard the public, they've read the document, and if they do, we can then see if there's any support, at what level of support there are from other council members. If we have no requests for specific changes that have broad support from other council members, then we move forward with the document as is to be voted on the following council meeting, which would be in October. And again, there's always the opportunity for discussion and voting it down at that point as well. But I mean, how many times are we going to discuss this?
So any council member who now asked has specific changes they'd like to make, they would offer an amendment at that moment? Would that be,
No, we're not. We're not actually doing the vote next week.
okay,
So it would just be
I see.
a discussion, but focus the discussion. Instead of saying, let's just have another discussion about this. Have a focus.
Mhm.
Because really what it's about is now there's been enough opportunity to input. After all of this, and hearing from the public, does anybody have specific requests for changes? And if somebody says, I have a specific request for change, we then ask, do other council members support that? If we see that there is considerable support, then we'll go back and make that change before it's voted on 2 weeks later. If we find that there is no specific change that has wide support amongst the council, then I think we have a final document we voted on too. I'm just trying to get there.
Yes.
No, I understand. Just wondering how you're going to control that discussion period.
Well, that's always a legitimate question.
Have your use of the gavel, maybe.
Well, it's, you know, it's always, it goes where it goes. You do your best.
All right, thank you, Mayor.
I'm just, well, I'm asking the question, is that a
So-
plan that this group can endorse and feel comfortable with?
So just to recap, we're getting the clean draft out to the council members tomorrow. It's also getting released to the public tomorrow. The next common council meeting, you're going to have the public hearing, after which you're going to have an open discussion for council members to talk about specific changes that they're requesting. Develop any traction from that on that specific direction or change. If there are none, we move forward. If there are, you will try and control the discussion process.
Or we may have to, if there really are significant changes that the council feels, we may have to send it back to the group to have another meeting.
In that case,
Hopefully not.
right, in the case of somebody suggesting that, let's, as a for instance, that the liaison question needs to go back to this committee, be reworked, that would wind up being a vote of a majority that would send it back to this body. So if there wasn't a majority voting to have this committee rework it, then that simply wouldn't happen.
Would we need a vote though, since it's not actually a
that's my
motion
question.
we're discussing next week?
We don't need an actual vote.
Yeah.
If, you know, let's say Katie recommends a change to it. Then we just say, who else supports that change? If one other person raises their hand, you're going to say, well, there's not enough support to make that change as the final document to stay the way it is. Again, everybody will have the opportunity to vote the document down eventually if they're unhappy.
So basically, we're getting a sense of the room,
I mean, we have to somehow get to a
but
final.
not an
document
actual vote.
we voted on, because if we're going to discuss every item every week.
Right.
We have to get.
Correct.
Amy, you had your hand up?
I did. I was just gonna ask a clarifying question with regard to the liaison issue. If someone feels strongly about that, that doesn't necessarily need to be written into the document, right? Because it's sort of the mayor's prerogative to establish liaisons to boards and commissions. So that could be discussed later without holding the document up, right?
Correct. I think that's correct.
Well, it says specifically in there that the liaison is the city administrator
Oh,
though, Barry.
gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the flow
Oh, it
chart.
says the
yeah.
liaison-
Gotcha.
My own personal feeling on the liaison issue is,
Where?
it's not appropriate having a council member as a liaison, and this is not appropriate because this is all supposed to be about the members of this board who represent the public having direct access to the council. And I think that they shouldn't be filtered through one council member. I think that if they have strong recommendations to make, if they have, that they should have direct access to the council, the entire board, have direct access to the entire council, and it shouldn't be in any way limited by going through one person. Just the nature of this board.
It also seemed to me that the sense of the community police board, as much as the actual physical actions of that board, are going to be reported back by the city administrator. And we're live, we're archived. It's not going to be something that the community police board is unaware of if what they feel is the communication that needs to go to council is not in fact that communication. So there is going to be some accountability there. And that's really what the community police board is all about. In any case, we're going to distill it as that accountability. So, folks,
pizza? All right. If there's no other discussion, nothing else that we need to
So
bring
is
to this
everybody
meeting?
okay with that schedule? that
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed to that.
Make five.
So if there's,
Doesn't work
is
out
there
well.
anyone who is not agreeable to that schedule?
I am agreeable to it.
All right, well, in that case, I think we've done this before, but I'm going to do it again. Thank you very much for everything you've brought to this committee. And we are adjourned.
I want to say thank you to everybody again. I know this turned out to be a lot more work, a lot more hours than anybody expected to have to put in. I'm hopeful that document that comes out is agreeable not only to the council, but to the community at large. I don't expect every single person in the community to be in full agreement with every item in the document. That would be impossible, given the nature of what we're doing and very different perspectives from people in the community. But in my feeling is that you've done an admirable job at trying to address the concerns that have been heard while making it a document that is based in reality of what we really can do.